Henry Hobson Richardson, one of America's foremost architects. He even has a style named for him, Richardsonian Romanesque. This building, completed in 1888, is considered his masterpiece and one of the finest buildings in America. If you were to lose your case in the courthouse here, you would take the sad journey across the Bridge of Sighs to your new home in the jail. Now, if you were asked to choose a group of people who you felt would not be easily made afraid, the inmates of Murderers Row would seem like a likely choice. But here's a story straight from the September the 16th, 1907 edition of the New York Times to make you think twice about that. W.A. Culp was on death row here for murdering his brother when he committed suicide. Thereafter, the other inmates on death row said that Culp's ghost was coming to visit them every night. Each one of these 14 hardened killers insisted that it was Culp that they were seeing, and they insisted they were too afraid to stay there any longer. Now, the jail has never been mistaken for one of Pittsburgh's posh hotels, where you can get your room changed just by asking. But these men were so insistent and so obviously terrified that the warden took pity on them and moved Murderers Row to a different section of the jail. But Culp is not the only ghost there. A woman haunts the place, where she fell in love with a man who cost her everything. In 1902, the jail was the scene of Pittsburgh's most bizarre love story. Kate Soffel was the 35-year-old wife of the warden, Peter Soffel. They had their apartments there at the jail. As was expected of wardens' wives at the time, Kate would read Bible stories to the inmates in their cells. Now, at this time in Pittsburgh, there was a notorious gang of bandits at large. Their modus operandi was to incapacitate their victims with chloroform as they slept and then rob them. This gang was led by the Biddle brothers, Ed and Jack. They were young and famous, very handsome, and they were bad boys. The young women of Pittsburgh went rock star crazy for them. But the truth was, these were nasty fellows. One night up on Mount Washington, they weren't content to simply incapacitate their victim, a grocer. They tortured him and then beat him to death. They got into a shootout with the police, and a police officer was murdered. The brothers were finally captured, sentenced to be hanged, and housed here at the jail. Now, in the course of reading Bible stories to them, Kate Soffel fell under the charm of Ed Biddle, and on the night of January the 29th, 1902, she incapacitated her husband with chloroform. She had provided the Biddles with a hacksaw and a pistol. They overwhelmed the guards. Kate led them through the warden's quarters and out that door. Most scandalous of all, she went with them. They stole a one-horse sleigh with a horse named Flora, who became famous, and took off north for Canada. 2 days later, a posse caught up to them in Butler County, and a shootout took place in the snow like something out of the Old West. In the end, the Biddle brothers lay dying. Kate Soffel claimed that she had asked Ed Biddle to shoot her in a final act of love. However, she received her wound. She survived it. The Biddle brothers' bodies were brought back to a mortuary on the south side. The day of the viewing, the streets of the south side were jammed, mostly with young women. The streetcar company said it was the busiest day in their history. When the doors opened, 5,000 people filed past at a rate of 55 a minute. One poor young thing, Mary Dale of the north side, didn't go to see the bodies. She wrote Jack Biddle a love letter, promising to meet him in heaven, and then drank poison. When they found the poor thing's body, the walls of her tiny apartment were plastered with pictures of the handsome young brothers. Kate Soffel was jailed for a time. Upon her release, her husband would never reconcile with her, and she died too young in 1909. We got a new jail in the 1990s. These are county offices now. I have a friend who works there. She tells me there's an out-of-the-way ladies' room where Mrs. Soffel's spirit can be felt to this very day. She also haunts a place up on Mount Washington. It's where the Shiloh Grill is now. It was the last place they lived, probably the last place where she was happy. Just a little while ago, a guard told me that he came in very early one day and a woman was already there, sitting on a bench in a polka dot dress. "Well, you're up with the birds," he said to her, at which point she simply vanished. Was it Mrs. Soffel? He couldn't say. But the last deputy warden of the jail had his office in the room where the Soffel's bedroom had been. He said, "I'm not a believer in all this spiritual stuff, but some mighty strange things took place in that room. like pictures moving on their own on the wall, a sound like sand falling through the wall. And once he felt a cold hand grip his arm. He was sure it was Mrs. Soffel. The movie Mrs. Soffel, starring Diane Keaton and Mel Gibson, was partially filmed here at the jail, as was what I consider Pittsburgh's greatest, if creepiest movie, The Silence of the Lambs.